Okay, good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. We have a lot of ground to cover in 3 hours here. I want to start by just going over the agenda, and then at 10:10 we're gonna get to work. So in front of you, you have a packet, you have a highlighter. First, taking a look at the agenda, I thought there was some value in just kind of understanding the sections that comments occurred in. We have over 200 comments. And these are specific to comments, not so much track changes. Track changes where a sentence was added were incorporated, but if it was a comma, a misspelling, that's not going to be in the packet. Okay, so I wanted to keep it to your comments and any new content that was being added. So you can see the distribution there, a lot of comments in chapter 3. And so when we get to discussing chapter 3, we've allocated more time to get through that aspect. So a couple of local comments, so that we're going through things today, we can kind of just put these to the side, if you will. As it relates to Jefferson County, there was a variety of how we reference Jefferson County. And so we now understand how it should be referenced as Jeffco with a capital C or Jeffco with a lower c and open space. So you will globally make those changes across the document. Additionally, open space is sometimes capitalized, not capitalized. We will go through and apply that appropriately in a situation throughout the document. Also, a terminology issue. At times, I say social trails, and at other times, I say informal trails. We will clean that up to be social throughout the document. Okay. We are going to talk more about social trails later today, but I'll just put a pin in that conversation for the moment. Okay. So with your packet, I want to quickly touch on the documents you have in front of you. So the first document under the agenda is a spreadsheet. It's a 30-page spreadsheet that has page numbers on the bottom. It is all of your comments in order of the document. Okay, so this is going to be the tool that you mainly use today as we're discussing the document. So what you'll see is a comment number that's been assigned to the comment and the location where you can find it in the draft document, which is the second piece here. Okay, so it identifies the chapter and the section name, the specific comment, and then an action. So sometimes the action is, I'm not clear, this requires discussion. Other times there's a suggestion to modify language, and so I've restructured the sentence. So it'll say update, and you'll have a new sentence there. Okay, so today as you're in groups and as we're discussing collectively, you'll be looking at the comment and then the suggested update to address the comment. Okay. So the next item on the agenda, I debated whether to put this on there, strategies for success, right? We all know how to conduct ourselves, how to manage these types of conversations, but because of our limited time, I wanted to hone in on 2 key aspects. And that's really staying focused on the topic at hand. Open space and conservation are huge topics. And so when we're talking about the spectrum, it's very easy to start thinking about social trails or another aspect. But I want us to try to do our best to, if we're in chapter 1, let's talk about chapter 1. If we're in chapter 6 recommendations, let's go all in on recommendations. I think it will really help us to use our time better. Additionally, today is about getting consensus on things. There's no right, there's no wrong. There's times where we've got to find that middle ground that's going to make sense for the community. Okay. All right. So taking a look at the rest of the agenda, you'll see we've allocated a specific amount of time for each of the chapters and the discussion. So very shortly here, in like the next 3 minutes, oh no, I have 7 minutes. See, I'm going to follow this timer all day today. We are going to start the discussion on chapters 1 and 2. And how we're going to do this is we are going to have you break into 2 groups. And we're going to have you take 10 minutes to look at the comments that are associated with both chapters 1 and 2. And for you as a group to build consensus on the comments you would like brought forward for group discussion. The reality is we can't discuss 201 comments today. So let's discuss the ones that we feel need to be addressed and discussed as a group. So I'm not going to dictate that you only bring 3 forward, but we're going to suggest that each group bring between 5 and 10 forward that they would like discussed before the group. Now, as you're going through those comments, you might be one where the action addresses exactly what you brought to the surface. And so while it was a priority for you in draft, you're content with the solution, and so you don't bring it forward. And so that's why it's very important to look at the suggested action in the new sentence or paragraph that's been developed to address the comment. Okay, so after the 10 minutes time, we'll have each group give us a quick rundown of the number comment that they have selected for discussion. I'll highlight those, and then we're going to go through them in order. So we're going through the draft in the order that it's written. Okay? And for the first one, we'll have 25 minutes to go through chapters 1 and 2. And chapter 1 just had 4 comments, and we had 53 in community engagement, but a lot of those are around very similar topics. And what I did try to do in this document is if we have a common topic, like comment 1 and 2, they're talking about the same thing. It's a conversation. So they are shaded, so it's grouped together. And then you'll notice the response cells are merged. So this response is addressing these 2 comments. Okay. Any questions so far? Yes, Ann.
Are we limited in our discussion to the specific comments, or can we also discuss the content that might not have comments?
I don't know if I'm totally following the question. So I think, are you stating if a comment wasn't made, you have a topic you want to bring up for conversation? Yes, and I think the most appropriate place for that is when we get to recommendations, unless it is directly related in some way to an area. And are you talking specifically to the proposal that you put forward yesterday?
No, I just think this was a big document. And when we go through it and hear the discussion in our small group, we may have other comments to make. Can we consider those also, or are we limited just to the comments that have been previously made?
So I would like for us to focus on these comments, but I do understand that they could lead to something else. So I'm not going to say, no, you can't put anything new on the table. If your group goes in that direction and there's consensus about bringing a new item forward, let's do that.
Okay. Okay, can I also ask, are we going to go around and introduce?
I know we have a couple of new faces in the room. I was just looking at the time. Let me get through the agenda, and then yes, we'll do a couple of quick introductions. And Colin hasn't been here for a while, so you can reintroduce. Okay. So after we finish, so we will come together in a group. You'll have 10 minutes to build consensus on items to bring forward, and then we'll do 25 minutes of group discussion. After we are done with chapters 1 and 2, we are going to have a preliminary discussion on chapter 3 before we dive into it. There are several comments related to social trails as well as public use. So if we can address those as a group before we dive into comments, I think it will narrow the number of comments that are brought forward for discussion. So we'll take 20 minutes to do that, 10 minutes per item. Then we will go through the same routine for chapters 3 and 4, coming together in groups. I would like for the groups to be mixed each time, so different voices can be heard and come through. And we'll go through 25 minutes group review after the 10 minutes. We do have lunch coming in at about 11:30. I have a 15-minute break scheduled. I'm hoping that we can look up and stretch and enjoy our lunch. It might be a little shorter than 15 minutes, but I wanted to try to at least, we need to stand up and stretch and maybe use the bathroom. So I've got that weaved in there. And then when we come back, we will focus on chapters 5 and 6. First, looking at those comments that are there in the same exact format. I only allocated 5 minutes for group conversation, which I know is really small, but there's not a lot of comments across 5 and 6. So I've narrowed the time there. But you'll notice agenda item 7, the final one, is a much more in-depth discussion about the recommendations. Because while there aren't a lot of comments, we need to make sure we have consensus on what we're moving forward to CRAB as well as City Council. Okay? All right. Any specific questions on the agenda? All right. We will do a couple of quick introductions. Anne, ready?
Yeah, I'm Ann Byerly. I'm the Public Works Director.
I'm Carly Lawrence. I'm the Deputy City Manager.
I'm Jesse Batter. I am the Deputy Director of Recreation and Golf.
I'm Billy Anapola. I'm the Forestry and Open Space Supervisor.
I'm Hannah Clark.
Tom Swash, member of the working group, and Bill Leger.
Ann Norton.
Russia Trigger, long time resident in open space since 1998.
I'm Lauren Hendricks.
Lisa Bemis.
Lee Taylor.
Colin Heinrich.
Ashley Giles.
Harry Tanner with General Resources.
Chris Jackson. Very done. And I'm Rihanna. You guys got all the emails from me.
Okay, so we are on track right now at this moment. We're going to go ahead and break you into a group of 5 and a group of 4. So just 2 groups today. That way it'll kind of keep us, we won't have as much reporting out. I think it's still relatively small to work in. So just for our first round, we will keep it simple and we will take the 5 here on this corner and the 4 here on this corner. I think, are we comfortable with having Preston participate?
I think if we just want to listen in.
You want to just listen? If we do that, let's do 4. Yeah, so let's do 4 working group members for each group. And Preston, you're welcome to sit in and listen to either group. Okay? So again, you're going to take this packet. You're going to look at the comments and the actions. For chapters 1 and 2, it is pages 1 through 10. But you are going to see there's a lot of common themes, especially as you look at the survey, as well as some of our engagement opportunities. Okay? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start the timer. Do we have any quick questions?
Do we move chairs?
Oh, yes, please. Oh, great idea. We're swing them around, so you're. Come back together. So I think this is a lot to go through in a short amount of time. The goal is to build a consensus about what we most need to discuss today, but it's a lot to take in. You're looking at a comment, you're looking at the document, and you're looking at my response. So let's come back together for just a moment. I'd like to first pose the question to each group. I'll start over here. Were you able to make it through both chapter 1 and 2? Not completely. Okay. About what page did you make it to?
We were kind of bouncing around a little bit, so I don't know, maybe halfway.
Okay. And did it feel more like there's certain topics that you would like to discuss versus a specific comment?
I think the survey in general, and then also just a general desire, I think that runs through something that wasn't, the comments weren't grouped in this order, but just the desire for some definitions.
Terminology. Okay, so 2 concepts so far that you'd really like to discuss. Okay. And how about this group? How far did you make it through the process?
We discussed up to 2-4. We didn't go through individual comments that far. But we mostly focused on, I think, some issues with the survey, more so than.
We got bogged down in this process and trying to figure out how in this group which document.
Okay.
So maybe we spend more time on that than.
Then getting through the comments. Okay, sure. I totally get that. I spent 2 solid days staring at it. You didn't have that advantage today. Okay, so it sounds like really you made it to about the same place, to engagement with an emphasis on the survey. You talked about also wanting to discuss definitions. In your discussions, were there any other topics that came up that you felt like needed to be discussed?
Mostly we just discussed with you about the openness.
Well, documenting. Some of the concerns that come up that your meeting, I mean, I think it's a faster way to deal with some comments than try to resolve them, because like classification, we spent days on and still didn't really get to where a lot of us wanted to be. So if you document that, the working group had issues or wasn't fully discussed but didn't resolve their concerns about the class. Like if you document that, then I think for myself and maybe others in the group, we feel like we've been heard and it creates a record. If there are issues going forward that we can say, yeah, the working group was talking about that and had concerns about that. So I think that would make a lot of us feel more.
Okay. So maybe not such a desire to go through all of these comments specifically, but more making sure we're capturing the overall consensus of the group. For example, the survey, right? That's an area where there's been a lot of question and concerns expressed. So making sure that's properly represented.
Yeah, instead of this group getting caught in re-arguing a lot of things or rediscussing a lot of things, we can just, we'll be 3 minutes into it and go, okay, let's just document, we still have concerns. There are other ones we're gonna want to go all the way through and try to reach a consensus, but we're not gonna have the time to do all of it.
We're not gonna perfect this. We've been through all of these meetings and all of the discussions. There's no way to make it perfect to meet every stakeholder's needs and wishes. So there's a recognition that let's do the best that we can and document the concerns with the hopes that it's to some degree a living document that will readdress some of the issues that come up in time.
So I'd like to take a different approach than what's laid out. So I've reviewed all the comments, and in my mind, I kind of know the ones that are the most concerning or the ones that got the most traffic. And so if I think about chapters 1 and 2, 1 is pretty much fine. There's no concern there. 2, I would like to talk through the statistical survey for just a couple of minutes to discuss how it's been addressed, to see if we have consensus there. And then as it relates to the other engagements, there were a number of comments because people who were being engaged maybe weren't as knowledgeable as this group. And so pointing out that, wait, no, that is on the National Registry. The preference would be to use the language that these individuals have used in the document and not modify it. And so if we can agree that the stakeholder comments are the stakeholder comments, then that would be consensus and we can leave that alone and not edit or retract comments that people made. Okay.
I think you might know if the document was more clear that these are verbatim stakeholder comments, not necessarily conclusions.
I was just gonna say that again,
Yes.
making a clear document what is what.
I like that because there was a comment in here that it was taken as a recommendation. And my comment back was, no, this is just information that was gathered. So to your point, when you introduce that topic and that information, to put that wording there, okay?
I think that's a confusion that I had reading through this is we have the survey, we have the stakeholder comment, we have, guiding golden comment. But maybe I missed it, but it wasn't clear to me how all of those were being used or integrated, if at all, with the final recommendations and the final plan.
So if we look at chapter 5, key findings, there's a section on community engagement. I tried to extract out common themes that occurred across engagements, whether it was conversations with this group, through the survey, through what we learned through the open house. And you can take those key findings and you can probably find a recommendation for all of them, whether it's focus on conservation, whether it's a focus on examples. But that's what the key findings chapter is all about, is taking everything from chapter 1 through 4 and saying, hey, these are the things that we want to address first and foremost, and then here's our recommendations to do so. So if we could, if the group is comfortable, and we tackle this survey conversation briefly. Because I think really what we're hearing through the comments relative to the survey is just really still these outstanding concerns about the process that was involved. And so we had included this blue box here that starts to say Crab expressed concerns, the community expressed concerns, this body expressed concerns, okay? Comments came through. You can see the number of comments here. This got probably more traction than anything else in the document. And so I did rewrite this box. If you look at line number 20 in your packet to try to address all of the concerns that are stated here. And so what I would love today is consensus on if the language is accurate to how some of this group is feeling about the survey, okay? I'm going to go ahead and read it so that we're just all on the same page. Concerns about the community survey were raised early in the process and should be taken seriously. Many participants, including community members, city staff, and some members of TRAB and the working group, felt the survey lacked key context. Specifically, it did not include a visual map of Golden's open space properties or reference the city's adopted open space mission, vision, and definition. These omissions may have led to confusion and influenced how respondents interpreted questions and prioritized their responses. This challenge reflects a broader issue. Without an adopted open space map, it was difficult to ensure consistent understanding or gather accurate data. Many residents remain unsure about which open spaces are managed by the city versus Jefferson County. This confusion reinforces the importance of this planning process and the need for clearly defined open space categories, terminology, and mapping moving forward. As such, the survey results should be interpreted with caution and considered within the context of these limitations. Okay, so this is where we are trying to document the many concerns that have been expressed. Just with a show of hands, how many people feel that this language is capturing the concerns that have been expressed?
All of the concerns?
I don't know if we can ever get to all, right? All of the definitive.
Yeah, let me just say, because I raised this, a comment that I have consistently, and I know other people that I've talked to have also. It's also the confusion, and maybe that's the reference to the mission, vision, and definition. But I think the fact that these questions about open space were intermingled with the majority of questions, which were about parks, facilities, and amenities, was very confusing in terms of what's an open space versus what's a park. And so if it's confusing, then some of the responses
Are skewed.
are skewed. Thank you.
In addition, the survey was, the respondents of the survey were twofold. One was, it was sent out to people randomly, which is going to get one set of responses. And then other people who probably cared would go online and do the survey. Those were two different results, and we don't know how those were melded together or interact with each other.
So they were kept separate.
Right,
So
that's not, okay,
okay,
so that's
so
not.
in
not related.
the content of the document, we state that we're only showing the statistical side, but we point to the non-statistical and provide that data in the appendix. And the findings between the two are minimal. We're talking less than 5% on different categories. And so we know that. I want to share one more item. And then I think we also need to look at this as what's the resolution? If we can't get this language right, what is the suggestion for success here? How do we get past this? Okay, the only other piece I want to mention is on line 23, because this was important as well, that we were very clear that the survey was intended to inform both the open space master plan phase 2 and the Parks and Recreation master plan update. So I wanted to note that we have added that language as well, not only the call out box. So that's where we stand right now, thinking solution-based. What are the options the group would like to put forward? Because the survey is done. We're not going to, I don't believe, do another survey. We want to get through this process, and there is some valuable info there.
Yeah, the other issue about is the nature of some of the questions. Specifically, the one about acquiring additional open space for public use. So there was no definition of public use. I think it's been interpreted in the draft, as I recall, as public access. But there was no opportunity to say acquire for.
Well, it doesn't say specifically for open space. It doesn't say what the intended use of the acquisition would be. You are correct there. So what's our solution? Is it to not put the survey in? Is it to, how many disclaimers?
I think in my mind, it's being very careful about how those results are interpreted in the document. And there are several places where that interpretation, I think, is not acknowledging the difficulties or flaws with the questionnaire itself. For example, the one about acquiring open space, I believe that there's a discussion in here that's interpreting that as public access. Recreation, but that's not. So I think there was clarification first of all, mentioning that there were concerns about this, the survey and that we mentioned, delineate them. And then being really careful how those are being interpreted.
Okay, so we are calling out, go ahead, Tom.
I think with regards to anything that's specifically missing from your rewrite of the blue box. In the blue box, you do distinguish between confusion between City of Golden open space and Jefferson County. What I think you missed is you don't distinguish between open space and parks. And specifically that parks have natural areas that are not open space. I think somebody brought that up. I think somebody thought I was suggesting the natural area in the Logan and Mining Park was an open space, which I didn't mean to imply that at all. But I think we need to acknowledge that we have natural areas in our parks that are not open space. And perhaps another sentence or a longer phrase in your rewrite of the blue box could distinguish between parks that also have natural areas that are not open space.
And we could bring in, I think we have a definition of parks from prior Parks and Recreation master plans that is very clear on its intended use. Okay, and I think that's what you were getting at when I came by earlier today.
Yes. So, and are there specific areas that you can identify that you're concerned that the survey would take an interference analysis? Oh, yes. You know, if I can do them off the top of my head. But yeah, I think there are, and I mentioned one.
So maybe as we go through the document,
Yeah, I mean, it's a long document. I think the other confusion, and I don't want to belabor this, is in addition to what Tom was saying, there are also open spaces that have a trail that's where the recreation is limited. Not the open space areas that either those trails abut or go through. So I think it's hard to make that distinction with just that one question and then draw conclusions that lead to expanded recreation within open space.
Yeah, I just, wanted to say that I think it wouldn't be redundant, even though I know you, noted that you updated it in the main text, but to also add in the blue box as well. What I think kind of addresses these concerns from Ann and Tom is that the survey didn't clearly make the distinction between parks and open space, just because the blue box is basically where you're putting all the caveats the survey needs to be interpreted with. And so I think just calling that out at the end would help.
That section.
And,
Okay.
and also the survey with who responded to the survey. A sentence, just to, I know it's in the document.
Oh, but in the blue box,
If
expanding.
the point of this blue box is to just quickly highlight some of the areas of concern with the survey, put them all in, or just stick with the last sentence. The very last sentence says it. The survey should be interpreted carefully because there were concerns.
And on the bottom, at the very end of the survey section, I did try to bookend it with, while the survey provides valuable community input. Actually, I think I updated that text because there were comments. So let me give you the most important text on it. But it's essentially the same language, just again, trying to put forward that concern. Survey findings along with feedback from the working group and crafts suggest. Oh, sorry, that's not the right one. I apologize.
It's 39.
A lot of 13.
I think it's number 39.
39 is it. Closing with, while the survey provides valuable community input, its findings should be considered with an understanding of the known limitations, particularly the lack of an adopted open space. So this is reiterating, this is line 39, and general confusion around open space boundaries. Feedback from the working group and FRAB also highlighted the lack of understanding required regarding the creek corridor, which is water, and areas managed by Jefferson County open space. It does not address the parks issue, so this could be another opportunity there.
so not to further muddy the waters, but I think it's good to note that there are concerns that survey and probably country really yourself, but I think the real concern is how is the survey used in that analysis and the recommendation, and like how do you all do that when you write the analysis?
So one of the key findings from the survey, well, yes, walking, hiking, biking did rise to the top. So did protection of wildlife and conservation. And based on other findings from the open house or from this group or from CRAB, while there is value in the recreational aspects, and that's what people are associating first, the community also had a lot of value in the other things I referenced. And so those are called out in the key findings in chapter 5. I'll point you to the page. And then there's recommendations around those. So the document does not lean into the running, biking, and hiking, frankly. It doesn't, because that is not what we've heard from this body who is representing the city of Golden. That is not in alignment with the definition of open space that was developed during phase 1. It was a question on the survey. Yes, and it is something your residents value, but it doesn't need to take the front seat, if you will, especially when we understand that there is an education piece that needs to happen in the community as to the intended use of these spaces and which properties belong to who. And so we've leaned into the educational aspect because some of the answers in the survey conflict with one another. We want conservation, but we want to run, bike, and hike.
So I would agree that when I read the document, not necessarily word by word, but the overall was that the community wants conservation, preservation, whatever. But I don't recall seeing anywhere where you address the fact that there was that conflict with the survey between protection and use. And maybe I missed it.
It is very minimal. And we talk about the need for education in one of the questions.
I was just gonna point out, I think that's a really good point, and I think the conflict isn't in this, just in the survey, I think the conflict is
The actuality of it.
it's reality, right? I think there's some sort of conflict, how big it is and what it looks like, but I think that's what we hear on this topic, and so maybe it's worth acknowledging that the survey does reflect that there is some conflict in this area on these two topics.
Well, but I actually like how Ashley went further and said, if you look at beyond the survey to this group and X, Y, and Z, the lead emphasis, you know, there's conflict, there's more emphasis on the conservation. That makes sense.
I agree, but I don't know if the section describing the survey is the part to discuss.
I agree.
Yeah.
Just being general.
To your point, I think that I have it buried. So it's referenced in the survey, but it should really be a key finding as well, where you're marrying the two concepts, because I reference, I won't, but it's a like.
You said, you know, taking up a lot of words, but, you know, conflict, looked at all these other groups, this is how it's resolved in this study. I think it comes down to kind of simple. Anne, are you?
Yeah, I'm just looking at how it's, I think, again, and how they're being, those responses are being interpreted without the caveat that there were a lot of concerns about the neighbor.
I think that, I think the caveat's very clear. I think it is.
I mean,
I don't.
It says, you know, pursue with caution, this, you know, there's I think the caveat does say,
Well, but it's hard to tell in the document. That's right.
well, it's not actually in it yet. It kind of looks like you're saying,
Where was the survey analysis?
right, and that, I think that your comment will hopefully address that.
Here's, let me give you an example. And again, so the question that I mentioned about public use, spaces for public use. The interpretation in this document is expanding public access reflects the community's growing interest in outdoor recreation while providing opportunities to integrate conservation, education, and sustainable stewardship practices.
I think we can for sure talk more about that when we get to that point. I just don't think we're there yet.
Okay, but I think that's the concern.
I think it is.
You know, saying, okay, we're using this survey in this draft document, but there were a lot of concerns about it.
Right. I think what I'm saying is for this specific section about the survey, I think what we're hearing, I feel like is reflected in the words. And then we have to figure out how it is moved through the document continually. So I think just for this part, I think it seems like it's covered, and then we can kind of see what are the other adjustments we need to make. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, can we put a pin in the survey then? And we'll go back and we'll rewrite based on the comments?
If you're gonna do the blue box and you're gonna call out the mapping, also call out the other concerns that were brought up
Yes,
about the
yes,
survey,
absolutely.
or stick with the last sentence and
And just,
forget the details about it. Do something else with our concerns, but there's a discussion about the mapping, but there were some other concerns that were raised as well
okay,
about the survey.
yes, Carrie was taking notes so that we can get all of those in as well. And I think, we're not talking about chapter 5 quite yet, but chapter 5 is intended to be the items that lead to recommendations. So that first section is specific to survey findings, those being the bullet points that feed into recommendation. There's some massaging that can be done there as well, because it doesn't hone in on its education aspect that we just discussed. That's referenced earlier in the document, but it should be brought forward into a key finding.
And I think that including the survey, not necessarily the report, I hear that it's 100 pages long, but the survey itself in an appendix.
Oh, the survey, so the questions.
Yeah, the questions. I think that might help in people,
Like a link to.
a link to it, or just like, what were the questions in
The
the
survey.
appendix?
4 questions and a cover letter. So 5-page
Yeah.
appendix that just shows the question.
So
So
that
it's really
people can
clear
make
that
their
yeah, there
own.
was a Parks and Recreation element to this beyond the open space, and that is very clear.
If you're going to call it out about that, I just didn't want to lose the concerns, like if you attach it or
Yeah.
link it, but then you also had to like concerns. I don't know, that was what I was going back.
Unless it's summarized in 3 or 4 points right here in the box, and people could read that and say, well, what was the survey? And then link to it and see what the question.
Okay. So past the survey is where we get into the open house as well as guiding golden. Are there any items, doesn't need to be a specific comment that you're referencing, that you would like the group to discuss on either the open house or the guiding golden sections?
Holy parking at the Guiding Golden event. It was insane. It was such, I was really surprised by it.
Okay. Is the group comfortable moving on to a conversation on chapter 3? We know we're gonna rewrite on survey and you'll see new content around it.
Including the interpretation of the results.
Yeah, I will go back through and look at how those are written, because you have made comments on each one that you found concerning with how they've been interpreted. So I will go back through and based on this conversation, see if some things need to be modified there. Okay, so with chapter 3, this is really our inventory chapter. And so we start laying out the attributes, and chapter 3. So we start by providing a implicit map, going into the attributes, summarizing the attributes by property. Then we go into the spectrum-based model of classification and then the specific inventory. Many of the comments were related to specific properties and varieties of them. That's how we got over 90 different comments there. But there were 2 recurring themes that I wanted to discuss with the group. First is this definition of public access. And I think this is going to bring in your second comment for this group about defining things in the document. And the second item is about social trails. So let's start with social trails for a moment. So with each property, there is a field, if you will, where I have listed trails. And then I'm specific if there is a known social trail, and I include some information on that. Some of the comments were getting at the point that should we be calling out these social trails? If we have concerns about erosion and the other effects of social trails, why are we now documenting their existence? Because they need to be evaluated. So I'm just gonna start the conversation there with what is the group's feeling about how social or informal trails are used and referenced in this document? And I can point you to some specific comments if that's helpful. So comment 89 and 128. Maybe we get into the hundreds.
I like your addition. New comment 89, new contracts about circle trail.
Which one are you looking
89 and 128.
So with 89, the intention there was really an expansion about this definition of social trails and while they're functional, some of the challenges they present. Part of the broader conversation is, well, I think we need to document that aspect. Do we want to include the social trails that exist at these properties and the way that we presently have? Because many of the comments are around those social trails. Either we've got them incorrect or we've missed them. Should we be documenting them in this document? That's really the question.
Background, how were those determinations made?
On which ones are
Yeah,
documented?
areas have, I mean, were there personal visits? Did you guys visit all these open spaces? How was?
Now, a lot of
I know
them
a lot of
are,
it's-
they're either community known, Chad was aware, or a lot of it does come from work that Tom has conducted over the years and provided to the city. So we pulled all of those known social trails in, and they are very known as of date, right? There's a new one developing right now, potentially. And so it's not holistic in a sense because it was not a boots on the ground. You could say in phase 3, that might be a better opportunity where you really dive into where they exist and the evaluation of those social trails, whether they should be modified to designated or if they should be eliminated because they are damaging the natural environment.
Well, you should know where they are, and then Billy. Maybe you could speak to this as the guy, but you know, if we have, first you gotta document them and know where they are and assess them, phase 3. And then decide what the management strategy is and get rid of them or make them more formalized.
I would caution against showing them on a map though in a document, because you never know when the map might get taken out of context and somebody might be like, oh, there's a trail here and not read the legend and see that.
And that's the heart of the question is, should we remove those references to existing social trails? Because if we do that, that does probably address 15 comments across the document.
To me, I think that leaving a mention that there are social trails on this property in the text of that property would be okay, but not showing them on the map would be better.
I agree with that. But to manage them or eradicate them, you do also have to sort of identify them, maybe not publicly, but for management purposes.
Mhm.
So kind of pulling back on it a little bit. Kind of my example.
How does Jeff vote?
We know where all our social trails are, but we do not.
So like hogs,
Sometimes we designate them, sometimes we restore them, it's case by case.
North Hogsback might be a good example. So under the trails field, we just list that social ones exist. We don't state where they are. We don't state their length. And so I think what I heard is state that they exist, but don't provide detail on where they exist
Yes, that is what I would say.
Yeah.
and take them off the maps.
Yeah.
I think we need to indicate they exist, but maybe not show them on the map. Some of them, I think, are really valuable trails. Trail that goes twice hill from North Wood Street over to the 7-Eleven. A lot of people use that trail. I think if you think think about making that unofficial phrase.
Then formalize it.
And that's where in phase three, where they're doing the full inventory and identifying all of those social trails, then you determine where to designate. And so making sure those recommendations align with that.
Yeah, and I think that's
Can take a
beyond scope of this document. To say which ones should or shouldn't be done.
That's the assessment.
But
Yes.
as we proposed, we would strongly encourage that at some point we consider principles or guiding policies about how social trails and other aspects are going to be evaluated, which we
Yes.
don't have now, but, and we proposed a.
And we
a
have,
sample policy.
and we had a recommendation we were putting forward that is absolutely in the same vein. So we're going to talk about that after lunch today and how we can marry the two, or ours is just a little bit more high level. So we'll have that discussed in next hour, really. Okay. All right. So social trails, we've got clear direction there. The other aspect I wanted to touch on was the definition of public use. So
Can I just mention one thing about this? I don't remember it in here, and I'm just looking through, I mean, social trails are sometimes confused. People-made social trails are sometimes confused with animal trails. Do we make that distinction? Because in Kitty Run, if you look at a map, you would see what you might consider social trails, but they are elk trails. These are animal trails.
someone wanted to comment about the proper term for that.
That was me.
That was you, yes. And I modified the text surrounding that because to your point, didn't phrase it correctly, but now I have removed all aspects that would relate to trails made by animals. What is the name of that type of trail? A game trail.
Oh, yeah.
Game trail. Yes, a
Yeah.
game trail.
Yeah.
So, and are you just suggesting that there's a note that those should be treated differently? Is that or they should also be recognized through phase three? So game trails should be added to the phase three. Okay.
It's helpful, but I think in like the people who like aren't involved in this sort of discussion, we refer to social trails as like desire paths. So I don't know if it's helpful to, that's the term, I mean, I've heard that term way more than social trails. So I don't know if it would be helpful to like.
I wonder if that's a regional thing, because like on the East Coast, they say pirate trails.
I've said
I
number
and informed trails, I've
Yeah.
done in other plans, and so I intermixed,
Yeah.
but here in Golden.
I wonder if it'd be helpful to just like otherwise known as, just to like differentiate further from game trails.
You know what, actually, this leads wonderfully, I think, into this next conversation of public use and the concept this group has by starting the document, I believe, starting the document with a list of definitions. Because maybe we put social trails, also known as, and we can list other common references that people use.
Mhm.
So on the discussion of public use specifically, if you go through the document, sometimes it says public access, sometimes it says public use. That is a cleanup piece for consistency, right? Let's land on one and let's use it consistently throughout the document. There's also the question of, well, what does that mean? What is the definition? So I've proposed a definition here for conversation, but also want to highlight this group's idea of there's lots of things in this document that probably need to be defined in one central place. And so the concept of having a definitions list. Okay. So if you take a look,
Like, so where are you gonna get the definition?
well, so I think most of the items are defined in the document. It's just that they're not in one place, especially if you look at chapter 3, there's kind of this intro piece that talks about social trails specifically and what they are. It talks about a variety of designated access is another one. So they're all already in there and they don't have a lot of comments. It's just that they're not housed together. And so when you get to page 60, no, you disagree. Okay.
I haven't read them either, and that goes to one of my comments about natural resources. And the problem is, a lot of these have official regulatory definition. And if, like, how are you gonna pick what you use? And if you use, say, endangered species, and they got a more local definition, or, you know, it's going to conflict with the statutory definition. And so I don't have any like substantive, like, oh, you have to use it. Well, if you need to use it, there's legal definition, you need to use that. Other than that, it's gonna be hard to pick which one.
Okay, do you have any insight on that?
I think one thing we can maybe note somewhere is that this is not a regulatory document and that we will follow any widely known, like ESA is that has a very strict definition, but anything else, I think we can include in that definition list.
For the purpose of this document, public access is defined as.
Yeah.
And I think natural resources, I do remember that comment. And so my comment back is, I defined it. But maybe it's, we have to have a comprehensive list. I can come up with a list of 10 things that I think the group wants to find. I'll probably miss quite a few. And so a jumping off point is I can review the document and pull out things like social trails, pull out things like public use, if we can land on something today, and at least start that definition list.
And I think that's a good idea. And once you do that, there's going to be a lot of concern for 2 years.
What's the result though?
Yeah.
Well, that is a lot of work. If there's a regulatory definition, I think you need to use that, even though this is it is no legal document, but it's a public document, right? It's a city document.
So which are the terms that have legal definitions? There's threatened and endangered, so there's of course federal and state versions of those. Basic, complicated. What other things have a?
I'm wondering if you couldn't do something like where there is statutory regulatory definition that takes precedence over the definitions in this document.
The disclaimer.
Well, there is I didn't bring it, but there is Arapahoe County, I think, has a glossary of terms for their open space master plan. I think there are some other sources that we should look at.
Several
That I
different.
think would be more useful than trying to come up with them today.
Oh, and I wasn't gonna suggest that we come up with them today. It would very much be us going back, creating them, and then them being reviewed,
So
because
I think, yeah, maybe look at the other plans that have developed this or other regulatory, and we can provide some.
I would suggest Jeffco, since it's our neighbor
Jeff.
and our partner,
Yeah.
just,
I looked at, I don't
to
think we have a
Jeffco.
glossary. No, I just looked at your plan the other day. Yeah.
What's your workaround then when you have terms that have lots of?
I mean, if it's something that has a statutory definition,
You
you
use
use
it.
all of it.
Otherwise, it's, you let,
I mean, this isn't an issue that I recall coming up, so. It's hard to even-
I like a disclaimer. Because, I mean, in addition to whatever else, because that gives you broad coverage, right?
Yeah.
The fudge. Things.
That's interesting, yeah.
Can we look at the proposed definition of public use only because I'd like to get a general sense of if it's in line with what you would perceive that to mean here in Golden. I'd like to hear just thoughts surrounding what's been proposed. So public use refers to the ability of community members to access and experience open space areas for purposes such as recreation, education, passive enjoyment, and nature connections in ways that are consistent with the intended function and stewardship of the land. So I tried to cover a variety of uses, but then highlight it should be consistent with the property. That's why we have the spectrum, and we're determining the appropriate use for the appropriate area of each property.
Where are you reading from?
That's on page 2 of your agenda.
Yeah, it's in several places. I put it on the agenda because it was something that came up in the document so much. So page 2, number 3, and after we finish this topic, we'll have everyone go ahead and grab lunch. Sitting there. It was early though, when
It was early, yeah. No, sorry, I wasn't.
I don't disagree with it, but I think, intended function and stewardship of the land is a little vague in the sense, I don't think the spectrum still doesn't necessarily define what those are.
So it opens itself up to needing more definitions.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Okay, no, I do follow.
also community member.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Oh,
You can't, yeah, what is that? You're gonna have to define that, that consistency needs there as well.
yeah.
But don't you mean the general?
Public.
Mhm. It says to public access too, instead of. So is there anyone that finds this path of a definition concern. We don't need to wordsmith it or write it perfectly today. You are concerned, Dan?
No,
okay.
as long as we're not wordsmithing, I just need to think about it a little bit, but yeah.
And it does have the term recreation in there. And I debated whether it's appropriate to say visitation or recreation, but some of these open spaces do have recreational opportunities. And so the intention here was to highlight the spectrum of opportunities that they have, but also acknowledge that some do have restrictions.
Do you remember when we had the conversation about active and passive recreation? Or was it active and passive visitorship?
So we started with straight recreation, and then we went to active and passive recreation, and then we went to active and passive visitation. So over that course of the conversation, we took a step back from that term recreation, which is heavily used when we talk about active and passive in parks master planning.
Right.
And so when visitation came up, that was actually really, I think, a very thoughtful way of getting to what we're trying to get at, that there's different types of uses without confusing it with a parks, the intention of parks.
How do you want to address recreation?
With defining the term recreation in the glossary.
And then we spent half a meeting on this topic.
Yeah. So as an attribute where we define active and passive visitation, I think recreation is the combination of, no, it's not the combination of the two, not how it's presently written. I think honestly, with the glossary, we're gonna need our team to put it together and then get feedback from the group. And as you're going through it, if a definition ends up in your mind needing another definition in a sense, like now we need to define recreation, we need that feedback. But our jumping off point is we think there's value in having it, so our team will start to put it together. Okay. All right. Okay, so we are going to talk more about chapters 3 and 4. We are only actually 15 minutes behind. That's not too bad. I know. Okay, so how about everyone, would you like to grab your lunch, stretch your legs a little bit, go to the bathroom, take at least 5 minutes? Yeah? Okay, let's do that. We've had a lot of conversation already this morning. Pivot just a little bit. So I do think it was maybe not as effective in the small groups for the 10 minutes because it's so much content. So my ask would be, just as you're eating lunch, if you would peruse the chapter 3 comments, whether it's in the draft or in the spreadsheet I provided, just peruse it, become familiar with them. And if there's items that rise to the top for yourself that you would like discussed with the greater group, go ahead and highlight it. And when we come back together, we'll go through all of the items that have been selected. I think the group format was really difficult. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and try to start tackling chapters 3 and 4. I think we'll do this more from overarching concepts, just flowing through the chapters, if you will. So, for example, starting with chapter 3, the first topic is attributes. And so I'd like to hear from the group if there was any concerns that still remain relative to attributes. So in that category on page 11 of the spreadsheet, you can see the comments related to attributes and some of the responses that have been made. A lot of them did revolve around definitions, the public use, the public access. And so we've had that conversation. We're going to have a glossary. And some of them we were able to address. You'll see that in the update column. And then there were some, at one point we had 16 properties and we merged them. So there were some errors in needing to go back and recount attributes. And so we will go back and do that. So that is a lot of the attributes comments. So on that topic specifically, that was one of our meeting sessions that we had several months back. Were there any outstanding concerns on attributes that the group would like to discuss? Yes.
Like, I guess a statement that this is a dynamic process. there has been no inventory of the individual parcels in terms of the various attributes and resources.
So calling out that these may be redistributed after phase 3, after,
Yeah, and that's kind of an underlying, issue in the whole, that we don't really know everything, all of the resources and elements of these open spaces. I mean, we know some, but there hasn't been that kind of detailed assessment or analysis. It's
a
only
good
what we have done, Tom has done, and HP, but that's gonna inform.
so having that disclaimer and specific call out that how the spectrum has been applied, it might change once that inventory
Right.
comes back. Okay, and same with the attributes
That belongs here and in the introduction to the whole draft.
to the whole document. And I should
That's a gap.
reference that the document has gotten quite large, and so now it's at the point where it does warrant an executive summary. And so a lot of the things that this group has really highlighted today relative to the survey or these most recent comments, I think those should be housed in that executive summary.
I agree with Ann's comment that, there should be an iterative process, but we try to do it in a fashion. We can't go back and delinearize ourselves for stepping through the before we go forward.
So you have this inventory, but it may, spectrum will be applied differently perhaps. Okay,
You speak of words.
okay, all right, good comment. Thoughts on attributes, we're settled on the jumping off point of the 6 attributes. And there were a couple of comments about adding culture to a few of the properties and some justifications there. I didn't see anyone pushing back on those, and they seemed very reasonable and the why behind them. But I'll stop there. Any other thoughts?
I just had a comment about adding scenic to Kenny Run.
Was that, and I did I comment on? Well, you'll mark it, and that one makes great sense. Yeah.
And Welch did. It's where we discussed Welch.
Yeah, let's get into property and let's go to 2 more sections and then we'll let it. All right, the next section is the spectrum-based model. So we did a session on this previously where we went through So the spectrum-based model is where we develop the resource protection area, the natural areas, and the vegetation areas, and are ultimately preliminarily applying those to our inventory. There was a handful of comments in this section, again, kind of on the public use and really defining things a bit further. Are there any outstanding concerns about how the spectrum has been developed and what it is? Okay, no, so if we are looking at this document, I'm on page 20, and if we are looking at the spreadsheet with the specific comments, the ones related to the spectrum, there are 3, 72, 73, and 74 on page 12. And I'll just pause and let you take a look at those for a moment.
I agree with the comment on the lower quality thing, if we could say period or, something of that sort, rather than the quality word.
What number? Where are you?
That's, so on page 20, middle of the page, the visitation area under natural resources.
Yes.
76, yeah. 76.
Yeah, 76.
We just needed page numbers. But when it moved around. Right, it's, I mean. I guess it's, yeah. Oh, we use base.
It's usually including those.
That is what the account restoration would be. Okay, so the idea of the potential for it. Yeah. So, yeah. Evaluate. 76 on page 20. It's not the same. Yeah, it just wasn't a structure.
Yeah, Tom, that has been duly noted that we're gonna change that. I noted it somewhere in the spreadsheet. I just can't find the line item, but that was a poor use of terminology there. So we will make that update.
Just, the one comment, we were only able to find one other agency that uses this spectrum model, that was the US Forest Service, but none of the local communities. So I guess it was just a question about how widely used this is.
Yeah, I added the city and county of Denver and Jefferson. Well, so Jeffco, it is the spectrum, but it's different terminology within your spectrum.
I think it's misleading to say that as you updated it, because it makes it sound like it's the exact same, spectrum. So maybe you could say like a spectrum.
That's similar. So they're using a spectrum-based model, but they have 4 categories and the definitions vary. So that is a variation. So when agencies use the spectrum, it's the concept of a spectrum that has multiple classifications that are flexible within it. And so just like this group edited the 3 that we landed on, Jeffco has 4. 3? Oh, I know I just said the other day. Okay, 3, but you're the expert. So they also have 3, but I would say then the 3 are similar in intent, but labeled differently.
I think maybe if you just say something like spectrum-based model showing the wide, the choice made.
So it's not that this spectrum. Yeah.
That's still spectrum.
Okay. All right. So we'll tweak that wording then.
But going back to question 75, comment 75, have we moved on from that or are we still?
So this is the reduced value.
Yeah.
So we changed it to natural areas with fewer intact ecological features often located near urban areas. So
So that's math. Interpret with that. Can you not just say degraded?
degraded is the preferred term. Absolutely. Is that
It's an ecology term.
degraded? Okay.
Is it a management term, Ellen? Degraded? I'm sorry. Is degraded a management term? I think it's an ecology term.
I wouldn't typically use, but
Really?
I wouldn't say it's wrong.
We used to say previously. Degraded.
It has to make.
I think degraded as just a word swap. It does fit the intention.
Yeah, as an ecologist and land manager, I used to degraded.
Yeah.
I used to degraded rather than fewer intact ecological features, which is very ambiguous.
Okay, we'll leave it degraded.
As long as it can be applied.
I think what was there.
It's the, yeah, that's right. I don't know, I'm just saying. Not.
It's from the perspective, descriptive.
Okay. So our next section after spectrum is the overall inventory. So this is where the bulk of our comments came in. 15 different properties, a description for each property, lots of comments related to maybe the individual who the property is named after and not enough detail. So those type of comments, we have tried to go through and rewrite that language. And that is, specifically in the spreadsheet, and you would see it in the next draft version. So those were all very helpful. I think there's 3 other areas that come to mind that should be discussed in this section. The first is the 2 properties that were, first Triceratops has not been included in the inventory at all. And I'd like to have a conversation about the why behind that. And then the second property that we removed from the inventory. Welch Ditch, sorry. Welch Ditch, I should know that. Was removed. In both cases, there was a feeling that they were not meeting the stated definition of open space. First with the golf course, in that it's part of the golf course property, and it is specifically a trail. I have the exact language as to why here, but I'd like to hear from the group first on what your thoughts are about those 2 properties and if they truly meet the definition of open space. And Carrie, if you want to add to any of that as to why they were pulled out, please do. is you can have a trail that exists outside of a designated open space. And I think that's was our feeling with Triceratops, that it's not existing within an open space. But Stitch is a different beast in a sense, with limited access. So I'd love to hear your thoughts around that.
Well, I wrote a restoration plan for the city, on Welch Ditch. Without getting into the weeds, there needs to be a group that decides what happens with Welch Ditch. The city thinks of it in certain terms as now a fire break, it used to be stormwater conveyance, I guess it still is.
It is a stormwater, we consider it a stormwater conveyance.
And it's also now being managed as a fire break, through certain communities. Yeah, it however is a historic animal corridor. It's a grain belt. It's a, a blind or a break from South Golden Road. There are other communities that live on that side. There are some values to it that are undeniable and not documented. How it's managed as a stormwater conveyance is new, within the last couple decades. And that's fine if it's managed that way, but it has values and attributes to it that are worthy of consideration. Yeah, as open space.
I think where we got hung up, and you know much more about the property, is its primary purpose, conservation, preservation.
It's habitat, conservation and preservation habitat, absolutely. Animal passage, game trail. We both have cameras, on the ditch. Got bobcats, a family of bobcats living right next to crops. Mountain lions, I see on occasion, sorry, Billy, mountain lions.
Now I know why I was invited. So I'll speak to it from a property perspective. There's a couple of properties in here that probably fit in this, and maybe it's what's primary. And what's the dominant estate, right? So in our minds, our interest in Welch Ditch is not always we don't always have a property ownership. But for the most of Welch Ditch, we have a ditch right. And that is really specific, and the purposes of that is very specific. And that is the dominant estate on the property. And I don't think,
And can you define that? Dominant estate means primary use?
it means it's first, no matter else you want to do with it. The owner of the dominant estate gets to do what that is designated. So if the Welch Ditch runs through your property or your backyard, and you want to fill it in or landscape over it, the ditch right that sits on the property is dominant. So you have to satisfy the ditch right before you can do anything else to it.
What's included in the ditch right?
The ditch, well, a ditch right is a state right. It's
I know what it is, but what is it for a Welch ditch specific?
it is the right to access and maintain that property for the conveyance of water. So that's the dominant estate. And so I guess this comes to that. I think you are absolutely correct. I think the Welch Ditch serves a multitude of things. To me, the conversation around this becomes what's dominant. The other property that is similar to this, that is included in here, which we might have talked about, is what you guys are calling the Coors Tech wetland open space, which we call the Swamp Angel. So I find that fascinating.
Why? Where do you call it? Swamp what?
Swamp Angel.
Angel.
And that's actually in documents and on, so I don't know, that's in the 20 years I've been here, that's all we've ever talked about it. But that is a property that by plat is a detention facility.
Yeah.
So that's another one where the primary is, what I would say is the primary purpose. If you want to put a hierarchy to it, the hierarchy at that property, the Coors Tech wetland, is for flood detention. Right. And then it's just by by fortune that it has other purposes as well. And I feel that's the same with the Welch ditch.
And it's the same with a lot of the properties in that, they had primary values to them or attributes, and then many others that needed to be considered as, you know, and called out in the document. Maybe they were primarily, paleontological, but there was, wildlife viewing opportunities there as well. So just, you know, document.
Well, and not fair, I guess, my thought is if it's in this document, is it implied that the highest, best use or the primary use or the decision-making use is as open space? And so then the question becomes, do I need permission to maintain the swamp angel if it's in this open space plan for the purposes of flood control and detention? Because if the answer is yes, I'd like it removed because I think that's inappropriate.
So I think we talked about this in our very first meeting and recognized a lot of Golden's open space was acquired for other purposes. And putting my view, especially if when they're acquired for a purpose that they're still being used for, sure, that's the highest and most use. And recognize the other values. You're not going to be golden, golden could be prohibited from maintaining it. But I agree to be recognized as for all those uses.
Yeah, no, and I'm happy to have it here. I think, in particular for detention, I think it can, these things are not in conflict at all, these purposes, until, I have to go to the Parks and Rec director to go in and do work and get permission to do that work. Cause that's where I get into conflict. I can recognize its value as open space and I can be respectful of its use as open space. But at the end of the day, particularly for this flood detention, if I am negligent in my responsibilities to downstream properties if I'm not maintaining this to detain for floods. And so I don't want to have to go to Jesse and ask him if it's okay if I can do something.
I don't think we consult.
Well, absolutely, I think so too. No, so, but I do feel like it's that, it's the order.
You want it to be clear.
Yeah, is it sufficient to just have a caveat at the beginning of that section saying like this property's primary use is this?
Yeah.
It's got a designated purpose in it. It calls it stormwater. I think flood detention is maybe more accurate. But I'm okay. It's fine. It's absolutely good. I think it's absolutely compatible. I'm calling out kind of a potential conflict.
And appreciated because you're talking about the realities of how the city manages these properties. And
I'm pragmatic rather than aspirational, and I feel like a lot of what this group and this plan is about is aspirational. So
Really?
my role is different.
I don't feel like it's aspirational. I feel like it's just establishing a framework for how we think about these lands and how we treat them.
Which I do feel like is aspirational to, I think conservation by its nature is aspirational. Maybe in your mind, it shouldn't be. But I do,
Because aspirational means that it's something that you hope for, but not necessarily going to do.
Well, let's kind of.
now we're.
Well, I think this highlights an issue that's been raised before, is that a full inventory really should require what are the existing restrictions on use, regardless of where they are, whether they're in federal, state, or local law, or they're in the plat, or some other governing document, because that's also going to determine the use and the management.
So we had talked about that also.
Yeah.
So with the course tech property, if we maintain that one and change that designated purpose to flood detention, is the same applicable for Welch Ditch? Stormwater conveyance?
stormwater. It's the highest and greatest use,
Yeah.
with recognition that it also is habitat and a green belt for the neighborhood and animal corridor and whatnot.
The secondary use.
About additional values to,
Yeah.
to the area.
So
I didn't have strong feelings with that at all.
The draft that you reviewed several weeks back, it had it in there, and we did incorporate the language that you provided. And then as we were weighing triceratops and having that conversation and really trying to stay true to the definition, that's where not knowing about all the wildlife and just kind of talking through, I think, Billy, you provided some context about what you see. We had, but we wanted to discuss it with the group today.
Billy, do you want to speak to your concerns about calling all space open space?
I mean, when you think of open space, you think of open space, like, obviously, it's a narrow corridor, I think its value is a greenway as far as like flood conveyance, but it's like it's some more similar to like a green belt or a natural area. It's 10-foot strip of land that doesn't really strike me as like the definition of open space.
I think that would be some of the other ones, though.
Yeah. What about this drive here in corridor?
Right there. It's essentially the same size.
And actually, the city of Wheat Ridge open space plan is primarily concerning, most of their land is the Clear Creek corridor. And they do, they consider that.
And they refer to it as the green belt, but it is open space.
It's part of their open space.
They have people lakes
Yeah.
that are basically water, they store water for food, that's recreational.
So there's a model that we might be able to use to incorporate. Well, maybe we
I'm
want to.
less concerned
Really?
whether the Welch Ditch or Triceratops Trail is in or out at this point, and more concerned about having a paragraph or two in this plan that says how we add a specific space to be an open space or modified or deleted. I mean, I think we need maybe a paragraph on adding, deleting, and modifying, just, and that way we're covered in the future as well.
I think also we need a clear definition of what an open space is, because what you just said, totally, it's not what I've been thinking an open space is. I've been thinking an open space isn't open, but it's a natural area that's not built on. And so I think that would, as we're thinking about how to, if different people have different interpretations of what open space is, then the management's going to differ. So I think
We have a clear definition, it just felt like space.
we need
That was
we need a management definition, not a community definition, right? So that's two different things.
So that it aligns with, and I think that, Billy, was there something with the maintenance when we were looking at the spectrum, that there was a challenge with how that area is maintained and aligning with some of the maintenance recommendations?
I don't recall, I mean, the fire mitigation came up in the conversation. I mean, maintaining it for water almost takes out everything because, once you get to the top of the ditch, it's private property. So if you clear out completely the whole center, like you're almost taking out everything. Which we have done in the past.
It's from the center channel to the top of the berm is city. There's an easement, a right of way on either side, which gets maintained for fire.
No, it could be, it's for access. Our ability to do fire mitigation really depends on the underlying property owner. So in the Welch Ditch in some places, if you pull up J maps, the Welch Ditch in some places,
Disappears.
it's in city property. We own the property outright on either side of it. In other locations, it traverses people's property. And what we can do when it traverses someone else's property is distinctly different than what we can do when it's on ours. When it's on somebody else's property, we have the right to access it. it's not a guaranteed 40-foot wide, highway where we can come at it on either direction. It's thoughtful. It's the least we need to have access to it. And we are allowed to maintain it, in the channel so that water flows. So fire mitigation is not likely on where the ditch is on someone's private property. It's more likely. Nod your head with me, Billy, because I'm hoping we're on the same page, where it's on our right of way or on city property. We're very unlikely to clear cut it or be aggressive, where the ditch is on someone else's property.
Right, yeah, and that's not what I was.
Okay, I just
mean that the maintenance of the lanes, at least through the South Bunsell neighborhood, has been, and letters went out. This has been documented for fire mitigation. Nothing is said about stormwater conveyance, though we know that the ditch remains
Yeah.
for stormwater conveyance. Any maintenance that's been done in the last 5 years at least was for fire mitigation. Not on personal private property, but, on easements on whatever side.
So just to back up a little bit, I think I heard you say that with the understanding of the hierarchy of use, you're comfortable.
Oh, yeah,
Any of these properties being included.
yes, I can speak from
Your bill.
from my responsibilities as stormwater conveyance and flood attenuation. I don't find these properties to be incompatible with, included as open space.
So we'll bring Welch Ditch.
I know I don't have I think Welch Ditch is more interesting from a property ownership perspective. I know you guys were talking about, well, we need to talk about what are the restrictions on it and what are the property ownerships, because Welch Ditch is, from a city property ownership perspective, is very fragmented. We have places where we own it outright. We have locations where our only property interest is a ditch easement. We have other places where we have vacated our interest in the property and only hold a drainage easement. It's all over the board, and that's just something to keep in mind as well. If the idea is that it's a greenway in chunks, not in any sense of continuum.
So could we do the same kind of disclaimer, include Welch Ditch, the other properties, and then say, these are subject to the underlying functions or whatever word you want to use, hierarchy, why they were acquired, et cetera, use some words other than what I'm trying to say, but you know what I mean. A general disclaimer, these are considered open space subject to.
Individual property rights.
It's just identifying.
It's a use.
So you have people with cores and that.
I don't mind any of it.
As well.
In reviewing all of this, my only real comment has been, I don't want someone to hold up this document and say, this document says you can't go do your job. And I don't think that's what it says, but that's my concern.
So we would, if we bring it back in, we just need to have the right language about its intended use and secondary use.
I haven't, now, so now I can step out of my public works hat and just as a curious Jefferson County resident. Triceratops Trail is interesting to me because it is not managed or kind of operated by the city. It has kind of this NGA that is the steward of this property. That feels to me like to be the big reason why it feels different than these other properties. So
So be subject to the NGA.
So we bring Welch back in. We have an understanding there. It's very similar to cores. Triceratops has never been included in this. It came up at a craft meeting as to why it's not. And so our viewpoint, I mean, part of what you shared here, but then also that it's part of the golf course property and it's a trail, it's not open space by the definition of it. What is the group's feeling about Triceratops being included in the inventory?
I mean, the trail goes through there, but there are part of adjacent pieces of land that contain the tracks that are not part of the trail, right? I mean, this is kind of the confusion.
It's
So
not all owned by the city of Golden.
Yeah, it's, I guess the question is,
It's not owner.
We own it all, but the Friends of Triceratops Trail, who are also, that's the same.
Friends of Dinosaur Ridge.
Dinosaur Ridge, sorry, are kind of the stewards of, that trail. They do the maintenance, they do the signage, they do the public education, but I don't know that we have really.
You have a management agreement.
Yeah, but I don't think we have a on the ground role with that.
But I don't think that's inconsistent. I mean, I think Lubon Trail, it might be another example, and there may be other instances where ultimately.
Okay, yeah, I forgot we turned that over, okay.
Right, north and south.
so they still fall within our definition of open space, but they're just sort of managed
Yeah.
differently.
And I don't think the plan precludes that, contracting another entity to manage the property as long as the purposes are consistent, which are conservation, preservation, or whatever.
Recreation.
And I think that's,
I think you had a comment.
The area designated as Triceratops Trail National Natural Landmark, I'm guessing is about 5 or 6 acres in size, and it's quite a bit more than just the trail.
Yes.
It goes quite a ways south along Highway 6. I'm trying to liberate the features from the National Park Service, but I haven't gotten it yet to tell you exactly how big it is. But I've seen a map.
Now's the time.
They're not answering.
That goes beyond the trail. The ownership is the city of Golden, and it meets the definition. So there's an argument to bring it into the plan. I would not say heads nodding over here. Okay, does anyone object to bringing it into?
I think it's a great opportunity for Golden because you can include things that you are needing for other purposes, but you can also control how much open space. It's a good yard thing.
And it's a really important resource. So
It's right.
Spot.
Yeah, it is a cool spot.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about? Welch Ditch, the, Triceratops, what's like for the quarters?
Course
That's
is
already
already
in.
in, so we bring the 2 in and we have the 17. So in a similar vein, there was,
And I think like on the plat, it's called the Swamp Angel. I just am so fascinated at your terminology. You can call it what you want, but.
I like Swamp Angel.
Respectfully, as a wetland scientist, I do not. Swamp has a very. Wetland is very antiquated.
I wonder if we're not going to use it. Swamp. Oh, swamp.
so in the same vein, some of the properties, it seems as though we might have some of the boundaries off. We got great detail from various members, including some maps and some specifics. And so PRO and Carrie's team will have to go back and look at where they source their data, as well as consult with the city of Golden, because we did source GIS from them. And so we'll need to compare and contrast. It looks like in all cases, we made the properties, well, not, in most cases, we made the properties larger than perhaps maybe the parcel actually. So those are duly noted, but we're gonna need some time to go back and investigate and confirm with the city.
I just want to mention that the process that stewards went through to come up with the boundaries and the designations and the acreage was very deliberate and
We had your GIS, we had their GIS, and we had a conversation with them. And we tried to marry the 3. It sounds like there's about 4 that maybe we're off, so we'll dive deeper into this. Okay, relative to inventory, the other item that comes up quite a bit is species names being needed. Very, listen to that one a little bit.
I think the comment was including, the common name can mean different things for different species, and so we can, the scientific name or common. I think the only hesitation is these are, well, I think there's two options, either taking out the mention of them at all or in scientific names, but since we weren't the ones to actually do the inventory ourselves, I'm a little hesitant to include the scientific name.
If I look at other plans almost always use common names rather than scientific names. And that's why when I've done like public things like this, I've always used common names. Personally, I prefer to use a scientific name, fully populated. Maybe we could do it where we use a scientific name with the common name there, and then in the subsequent reference referred to by the common name.
Right.
That way we're clear what we're referring to when we refer to the common name. And I'm willing to help you with the scientific names.
Would it, is another.
Birds and everything else as well.
Well, birds, I'm sorry.
Right, I mean, if we do common names for veg, we
Yeah.
should do it for all the species, right?
Yeah,
I agree.
It gets tons of.
So for phase 2, is it perhaps appropriate to use common names? Knowing that phase 3 will have the full inventory and to focus on the scientific needs thing. Because right now, we're trying to really get our arms around what the properties are, what their boundaries are, and have some basic surface level description.
I think that it doesn't make sense to include species. Maybe it would make more sense to describe the community, like this is a like grassland.
You don't know that.
Things much more.
Right, but there is, there are data versions for that. But I think that just including, like, it just feels kind of random. This parcel has some things called out and they're not necessarily state listed or state. Like, why are they called out here and not in other places?
Yeah, mostly pulled them from Stewart's site where they listed them. This is more.
But that has a different purpose than a master plan, so I don't think they have to be,
So there's another option that to strip out those type of references entirely from the property descriptions.
I think unless it's super notable, like a state listed plant, so that's a different discussion about whether or not we should want to mention rare plants, because there are coach concerns. But that's, I think, what I would prefer.
I had the same kind of thought that, the descriptions aren't consistent. And there's different information provided for this site and that site, not for this site. I agree, just using state listed plan instead of saying what kind of plan. Better. I've worked with a lot of ladies species. Go where they are.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we have really deliberately not talked about the new ladies press orchid, at all. Because if you've ever seen it, it's so small, so fragile, it's just so susceptible to people's curiosity.
And that's common practice, that
Yeah.
in conservation, that you don't call it out.
Yeah.
Well, say
It's
a
a
lot
lot.
for.
Right. So just make mention of it generally speaking, but the assessment, phase 3, should absolutely have scientific name. And be amended as well, scientific names, especially for veg, change a lot.
Okay, so is the direction from the group to remove the specific references or is that, okay, I thought you maybe said use name, something or other.
Oh, like if we want to say, like a state listed rare plant.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay, I follow that. Okay, so just go through and then Renata, I think to your point, some of the descriptions, I've made a lot of additions based on comments, but you are right that it starts to become a hodgepodge of what's available in each. So
It'd be nice if
I
they're
think
consistent.
once we settle it, then we kind of go through and see if we can hit on the same things in the same order.
That would be great.
Yeah.
I think that would be consistency.
All right, so, The majority, again, of the rest of the chapter 3 comments are very site specific, a lot of edits to the overall narrative, which I just kind of touched on. We'll go back through and do look at consistency. Chapter 4 is where we get into our maintenance, preservation, and restoration. We have about 20 comments there. Are we comfortable moving to chapter 4 and discussing that? That would bring us to page 25 in the spreadsheet.
Not to derail, but just a little note here, the second sentence on source text, that is sort of one of the things. I mean, it's a detention pond, and that's what it's.
No, like I said, I provided comments early on, and I liked it. I'm happy to have it there, and I think the description has been really good.
And we'll bring back on what we
Yeah.
had previously.
I just have a quick question about possibilities on that. I think that the primary purpose is a detention pond, so you want to maintain a pond. But you also have a viewing platform or something like that, or would that interfere?
Oh, I think you could do all sorts of things there. You could do educational, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
But if the platform gets taken out by a flood, that's fine.
We want to plan for
You want to put it in the right spot.
the 20-year, 100-year flood.
The best viewing is a little higher, right?
Sorry about that. And then the drought is way up here.
So really, as I look at chapter 4, some of these we have tackled through other conversations, and many of them are just updates with overall. There is the addition of the utilities management aspect, which I do think a little bit of discussion is needed there. And that I don't know how much we can really control as it relates to that.
You give the comment number.
Yeah, so I'm on page 29 of the spreadsheet, and it is comment 184. And Tom, you added this aspect, so maybe if you could introduce it, and I think we really need some context from you on utilities access. So in the document itself, it is page 3.
184? That's on 62.
It's 58. I have it on 58.
I did 58. Okay, that's appropriate.
No, yours is different. The difference. No wonder. I'm looking
Okay,
around.
so comment numbers on the document don't match comment numbers on the spreadsheet because I had to insert the comments that came in a little bit later,
Got it.
and some numbers got thrown off.
A good attempt.
I was trying to put it in the right place. Why don't I see your comments, Tom? Where is it? You know what I'm referring to relative to maintenance. You brought in the concept of adding something specific related to utility access.
Oh, yes, it's, on page 58, it's about 2/3 of the way down. It doesn't actually have a comment.
Oh, okay, it kind of gets lost because you've added this row here on page 58 that's not shaded.
But basically, Parks and Rec should sit with, Public Works and say, Public Works, we need access to this sewer thing here, and you guys kind of agree on. how you-
The minute you say gas, you're talking about other public utilities. So Excel, Comcast, Verizon, we're really water, sewer and drainage.
Right,
So you could call it access by utilities, but, you're probably only gonna have luck with that coordination with city utilities.
But just say city utility.
Yeah, you could just say city utilities.
We were
That's
just speaking
fine.
to that, Ann, about works needing access to the ditch.
Yeah,
Tom, is this maybe more of a recommendation that the department coordinate on those things with other city departments?
I would think.
Versus then-
The management plan, say for any run or for Pepper Gulch or something, that we were doing the management plan, we say, oh yeah, there's a water line here and there's a sewer line there. And so we know where it is, and if there's any issue, like Whether you do this versus that or something like that, it's white shields, kind of water line through it, right? How would you access that? Things like, just to indicate that it's there and to see if there's something, well, you drive here and you don't drive over here, that would be better, sort of thing.
So it's identifying those access needs for future potentialities.
Yeah.
So Tom, is this maybe a phase three? And I hate putting so many things to phase three, but when we talk about really site-specific items and developing site-specific plans and understanding everything that's there, I don't know if it fits in this matrix of routine maintenance.
It totally
But
does, actually.
I think it is, it does, because I was thinking if you're,
Because you can just say something, just have it in there and just say, identify potentialities for
for
access.
all
needs,
property
for-
types.
For, yeah.
Like inventory and review encumbrances also to try to address the non-city ones, perhaps. That should be documented somewhere. I know it's not necessarily the.
And that's part of understanding each property.
So you don't have to, it doesn't have to be specific, it just needs to be in there.
Okay, so you,
That makes sense.
I think there is typically coordination between the departments. I think it's more just outside, like Excel or whoever, they just show up because they don't.
But you still want that stated in your management framework, right?
So if it's already happening, that's an easy one to say, yes, we did that.
yeah, and so it's documenting it as part of the routine.
So are we on page 58 still?
Yep.
Yep.
What is the fire mitigation committee? Is that a city?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, and other regional partners, I would say other local partners, like HOAs.
Where are you?
It's on page 58 in the middle about fuels mitigation.
And the management
Oh, okay.
recommendation. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Right in the middle.
So fire mitigation committee, local and regional partners?
That was the biggest,
So, well, let me, but I can throw in, so here's one where again, it gets to Excel. And they're in town right now, so it makes me
Yeah.
think about it.
On the niche.
Everywhere, everywhere. Excel will tell you they have the right and, they will give you notice and that is what you'll get. So I don't know, I don't know exactly how to,
I think you're.
when you talk about their local and regional, yeah,
It's more realistic for what can be controlled. It doesn't mean we can't reference the attempt to try to.
right, okay, that's.
communicate with these other groups, but it's a different piece.
Being very, this is
Better
recorded, so I didn't say that.
Okay, if the group is comfortable, we have 30 minutes left, and I'd really like to dive into the recommendations conversation.
I just have a quick question. I just want more X's in the visit station area section. I mean, I feel like our goal is balancing conservation and recreation. Like, why wouldn't we want to avoid unnecessary maintenance activities in visitation areas? Why wouldn't we want to monitor riparian habitat conditions in visitation areas? On page 60, just kind of check, I want to check more boxes in the visitation side as far as management plans. And yeah, I think then when you check all the boxes, like what is, but none of the boxes are checked, so to speak. We're doing the same thing in every area. Yeah, I mean, when you look at our definition of open space, it's all about conservation. So why wouldn't we want to take care of the visitation areas as well?
Or consider them.
And consider them. And I also feel like I don't have enough information to say what the resource protection area needs. One might not need some of these things, while another visitation area needs, monitoring or closing of social trails or
whatever it is, but I think when I start to check all of the boxes, like this doesn't provide me with a lot of information then.
So
Yeah,
can I do an example?
yeah,
So like the avoid unnecessary maintenance activities in areas, we have resource protection in natural areas marked, but not visitation. And I think your point in large part is, well, why wouldn't you also do that in a visitation area? Always avoid unnecessary maintenance in our open space.
and I feel like it's especially important then, if we're gonna have traffic through there.
So it's going back through and looking at it through that lens of this is still a valuable space and we should treat it similar to others. But
So are we all about resource protection?
Yeah.
Wherever it occurs,
Mhm.
wherever the resources are.
And that would be monitoring the social trails as well. You would also do that in a visitation area. So it's really extending the use of the X's to cover visitation in a broader way.
And I think on the flip side of that, for some of the resource protection areas, some of these things like the weed management is the one that comes to mind for me. I think that one wasn't marked, but I think in addition to there being a regulatory requirement to take care of Class A weeds, in general, it makes sense to do weed management in resource protection areas, otherwise they can become overrun.
Yeah, I think resource protection areas can be just as intensive, like labor intensive as visitation areas, but it so depends on what each needs.
And looking at that weed management one specifically, that was one that got a lot of traction. It's on page 57, right in the middle, and there was a lot of support for that one. Would we say the group is in agreement on this topic?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll go back through and just go through each of these based on this added context.
Yeah, like definitely based on our definition of open space and our mission. Like, I think we just need to make sure that we're managing these areas with the way that we are putting there as our mission.
And having that alignment, yeah. Okay, and it's fine if the majority of actions are taken at the majority of properties. Okay, if there's.
Yeah.
Or considered, they don't have to be taken. but-
Oh, lots of it. Yeah. That's how a lot of it is, right? It's evaluated. Okay. Okay, so skipping forward a little bit into our chapter 6, because I really do want to spend the time that we've had together talking through recommendations. So that brings us to page 68 of the document. There's not a lot of comments to review per se, but I wanted to get confirmation on some things that didn't have comments, frankly, to make sure when we go to PRAB that we can state if we had consensus on topics or not. And so first, we did make some recommended modifications to the mission, vision, and the definition of open space. We don't change the intention of any of the three statements from the first phase. They're really a refining of the statements. I didn't see any comments related to these three. I'll make sure that's accurate. So I wanted to pose to the group, are we comfortable with these modifications? Are there any outstanding concerns?
I have a suggestion about adding, say protecting wildlife habitat. But also say native vegetation. Just take out wildlife.
Habitat, let's keep it at habitat. It includes
Everything, all of the ecology.
Don't you think?
But
What do you think so?
I'd like to see native in there.
Or, I'm sorry, are we on mission? Can you?
We're in the mission. Oh, recommended mission statement.
I think it's also.
Would you,
Protecting native habitat.
Yeah. And the general ecology, right?
Yeah.
what?
I mean, I agree, but I also feel like take the Lone Park, for instance, it's not an open space, but there's a natural area around it.
And while DeLong Park is managed as a native, there are a lot of non-natives in it. And they're valuable to us.
Okay, so
I agree.
I just.
Okay, so not native, how about something that,
Non-invasive.
no, something that's more positive, but is non-invasive.
Well, what's wrong with just habitat?
I would worry that that could be like any habitat as opposed to making the effort to keep it. Yeah, native.
I get you, yeah. I just want to make sure that,
This native habitat doesn't necessarily exclude one or two, a few non-natives. And then I guess if you're talking about non-natives, then you're talking about parkland rather than natural open space.
It narrows it, I only 2 feet.
Or instead of native, you could use natural habitat. That's.
So I'm gonna throw this out here. So there weren't any actual comments on the three. That doesn't mean they can't be wordsmiths. Mission visions are incredibly hard to establish, right? It requires a lot of consensus. You're gonna get a version 2 of this document. We've got a lot of changes. Can we put a pin in it and say, take some time, really look at the 3 statements and put your suggestions in a comment so we can evaluate them? Because I think we could spend 3 hours talking about the right term. Because what I'm hearing is generally we're okay with the changes. They're not giving us huge heartburn, but we could tweak just a little bit. Is that accurate?
Do you want us to spend some more time with the info or you are?
When you get V2, I'm not going to change it. When you get V2 and you're sitting and you really read it word for word, if there is a definition or a piece that's still a little bit off, then put the comment there.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so our next piece is an aspect that we did not cover specifically in these meetings, and that's the recommended criteria for open space acquisition policy. And this is something that the city was looking for as an outcome of this planning effort. There were a couple of comments here. First, we talked about it. No, it is a collection of the work that's been done. And we had 6 meetings with you, so we couldn't get it all in, but today is our time to talk about it. We base this off of the rest of the document. When we think about the attributes, specifically, that's a lot of where this is coming from. There was a concern with how it's written that the property would have to have all of these things. That has been rewritten, so it's not that it has to have all of them. There is an argument to be made also that the numbering maybe isn't appropriate because it's looking like there's more value in ecological conservation over connectivities and expansion. So I think that's the conversation piece. Should these numbers be removed to not value one over the other? The idea is this is the criteria that would help determine the purchase of a property. These are the 6 things we would take into consideration. If it's only needing 1, maybe it's not the right property to buy. But if it's hitting 4 or 5, then yes, let's continue that conversation. Is that accurate, Carly, to really what is desired by the city?
yes, I think so.
So there weren't comments about the 6 categories per se, but I want to open it up to any thoughts or concerns on what we have here. We're on page 69 and 70 of the document. And Tom, to your earlier point, when we talk about when an open space is removed or added, I think that this criteria should align with that. And so this could be expanded to include that.
So the criteria for open space acquisition or designation.
Yeah. Yeah, and then we're covering both situations consistently.
Is there a priority in these? Like one to.
You know, I think when I put it together in some regard, I was thinking priority with conservation on top. And a lot of planning efforts I do, people say strip the numbers out because different situations warrant different conversations. And so that's my feeling here, that maybe those numbers should go away. And these are just the 6 things we're considering.
That makes sense.
So that, like, ideally, a candidate would have, 3 to 4 to 5 of these qualities. Is there an allowance for, let's say, a future discovery that is, let's say, significantly, it's like very significant for paleontological discoveries? That maybe it doesn't have the other ones, but it's so significant within its sector that it's then worth a look.
Yeah, and some agencies, so a plan like this will typically give kind of a structure, right? Some agencies will take it further where they do develop scoring criteria and things are weighted differently because maybe there is so much value in what you're referencing. And so if there's the potential of that, and that's the only thing, it gets scored higher. So I think once they actually adopt the policy, then they have to determine how they use the policy. So it starts with what are the things that are really valuable to us when we're assessing properties.
So does that need to make it into here though, either?
A suggestion for a later scoring system.
I think that makes sense.
And I
That
can
could be it.
provide, I have some examples that I've come across that I.
Wait, I see now, I just hear but what I'm hearing a little bit from you is not exactly scoring. It's the idea that a property could be desirable because it has a lot of these attributes, or it could be desirable because it's very significant with a specific attribute.
That's fine.
And that is really different than having a scoring matrix, that,
Yeah.
breadth or depth are worthy of consideration.
With the weighting being specific
Okay.
to what I was.
Right, it could be more of an
So it
intro to this that's more detailed about.
Yeah, that it may only have one, and that's fine. These are the things that we take into consideration when we're making the determination.
Yeah, I feel like scoring is more useful when you're trying to decide between opportunities, but I don't think there's a lot of situations where we're choosing. It's
Yeah.
more opportunistic, so I don't really see much value in having this be super rigorously. Like,
Okay.
this
And it is
is ranked as a 5, and that gives it its total score.
super broad right now, where, and I think it was your comment maybe that was like, do you have to hit all 6? That was.
Take credit for the.
Oh,
Steve said it.
That was me too. That was you. Okay. And so that's, you guys are in the same vein with that. Okay. So I'll, make sure that's coming through a little bit more clearly. It's only 2 sentences. So yeah.
And where does it say about the inventory, like finalizing of inventory and minutes?
When I commented back there, I was a little bit confused about if that comment was actually intended to be placed in the introduction. As we talk about the development of an inventory there, and we changed that language to be broader system inventory. So it's clear the type of inventory that's occurring.
But that's on your list.
What are we talking about? I'm not sure I know which page you're on.
We're gonna make one, and we're in that list. It's just. Yeah. And we talk a lot about different inventory. Under the strategic action plan.
Oh, that's our next thing that we're going towards. Yes, okay, so we're wrapped up then, I think, on acquisition. So then going into 6.4, which is the strategic action plan.
Sorry, I covered there.
So this is interesting. There weren't many comments, which is a positive aspect there. But there was a comment that came up earlier in the document. I know I'm sending you guys all over this, but if you go to this packet here to page 24 and look at line 157, it's a comment, I'll read the comment because while there's not a lot of comments in the recommendations, this calls out and says, hey, did we miss something? And Anne has put forward a proposal that's in the same vein. So on line 157, it says, we need to have a commitment in this document towards identifying and minimizing trails resource conflict and evaluating designated and social trails for impact needs and sustainability with the goal of reducing, redirecting or eliminating both social and designated trails while considering other methods of access. It does continue on there, you can see it, but there was a recognition on our part that we don't really address this topic, right? We're very focused on the inventory of the various properties, as well as how they're maintained and not on this user conflict mitigation. And so we did put together an added recommendation. I know it's a little bit small there. And then Anne put together something similar. It was the last document in your staff.
If you're looking at me, Stuart.
Oh, Stuart, okay, yes. And it's guiding principles for open space travel. And I think what's at the heart of both is really this desire to make sure we have something in place that gets at how do we add trails and how do we manage trails? That's at the heart. Would you say that's at the heart of it, Anne?
Yeah, but the overarching concept, I think, is when I'm reading through this, I think, oh, well, this is, there's a lot of words here, it talks about policy goals and all that, but how do you, on the day-to-day level, implement what this plan codifies, right? I mean, how do you make decisions about proposals that come forward to change the use or decisions about the use of a particular open space or changing use? I mean, those are just examples, but the practical application of what's in.
Yeah. And often these planning documents are that 10,000-foot view.
Right.
And not how it's implemented in the day-to-day.
And that's where the conflicts come about.
And I think where we're in alignment is we're both saying we need to have a policy or something that's more detailed in place. Yours goes the step of developing the policy, whereas the current one says we need a policy for this, and these are the things that should be considered. Because we're at the end of it, challenging to figure out the best way to navigate it. If we look, I'm debating if we want to have you talk in more detail about this, or if we want to focus on what we have here and have the group tell us what feels right and what doesn't.
And maybe give people an opportunity to kind of think about.
To digest it.
Yeah, a lot of information today.
It is.
I think what you have is pretty good, but I think it also needs to be in the park and rec plan. At the same time, both, same words in both plans.
I think it's actually worked out quite well that we're adopting that one after this one. That wasn't the original plan, but just with even reflecting open space properties in that plan, that one has to come second because the work that needed to be done here. Okay, so Anne, I do think that's a good suggestion for us to insert it into the next version. You'll know that it's new content. You'll know the intention of the content. It's to address and manage trails in the long term. And have the group have the opportunity to sit, think on it, and provide feedback.
And I think some of these proposed policies apply to any kind of change or addition. It's not just trails. Yeah, I mean, picnic areas was something mentioned in here, viewing areas. I mean, that there should be some way on the ground to analyze whether or not it's consistent with the plans.
With the plans. And that's that more detailed processing. Okay, so we are at 10 minutes. I'd like to leave like 3 minutes for next steps. But you came into the room with thoughts, concerns. Is there anything that you felt you weren't able to express today that you would like to bring to our attention?
Good job.
You've been an amazing group to work with. I mean, I have learned so much through this process based on the knowledge that all of you have in the comments and really wading through them and trying to understand them and trying to develop something that will meet what the city and what Golden is looking for and not just be anybody's open space. So I hope that you can fill that in the document. I hope you feel it's on track. As far as next steps, we're with the CRAB on April 17th. We have a short time frame with them. Our focus is on the inventory, and so we'll be quickly, in a sense, presenting them with the 17 properties, also highlighting this specifically the 2 that have been brought back in because they've previously seen the document, but that will be the heart of the conversation, only chapter 3, okay? Then we are back with them on May the 1st, and that's when we're gonna present the draft with a primary focus on the overarching key findings and the recommendations, because they have heard the pieces of parts along the way. And we want to take time to work through those recommendations and get their feedback. That's also the meeting that all of you have been invited to attend and even participate in. And I think Renata has been collecting.
Yeah, I have a list of people.
I know, Rihanna. This is much more talking than I typically do. Sorry.
You didn't know you volunteered? Yes, when everybody was giving their activities, I do have a list of the people that indicate they would be willing to help lead or that type of thing.
Okay, so we will reach out to you in the next couple of weeks if you express that you're comfortable, maybe just even sharing your thoughts about the process and what role you'd like to play. We would love to have as many of you there as can make it. I think there's a lot of value for PRAB to understand that the work that you put into it, and also the knowledge that you bring to the table with how you've provided feedback on the document. After the May 1st meeting, we'll make a determination in some regard on next steps based on feedback there. Oh, excuse me, we open it to the public after that meeting for public comment. We also circle back with our phase 1 stakeholders who we interviewed and make sure they have a chance to look at the document as well. And we're going to kind of determine adoption based on the feedback that we're getting. So Carly, do you have anything to add there? We've
The community meeting. So in addition to making it available to the public, getting some more feedback from the community in an open house sort of format.
Yes, so we're gonna have a 2-week period where people can comment online, and during that 2-week period, we also want to have an open house. So if people want to come in and ask questions on the document, we're available to do that.
What about a community meeting? Is that on the table?
That's what that is.
I mean, but not an open house, but like we did for phase 1.
Yeah, so just say a little more about I think we might be talking about the same thing.
Well, I mean, I think an open house to me means you kind of come and go and you look at things and you put stickies on and do that.
And
versus
community meetings more informational towards people.
Informational, let people make comments, engage in a discussion.
Yeah, I think I was envisioning more like a hybrid of the two. So kind of like maybe an opening, here's what the process was, here's how this kind of came about, with kind of some sticky notes and posters. Does that seem kind of like what you were thinking? Because I think May 1st, when you guys are having your meeting with CRAB, that's a public meeting. So I do feel like there's a lot of informational opportunities for people.
I'm just not sure how effective those are.
Yeah.
I know that's a model that we've been using a lot, but they don't seem to be as well attended
Yeah,
as when we have a designated.
So if you're saying like a community meeting, would you envision like no feedback opportunities? It's just like
No,
presentation?
No, like phase 1. I don't know.
You want structured feedback versus come and go when you please. So everybody shows up at
Okay,
the
yeah,
same
I'm with you.
time.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think that's what we're envisioning.
I mean, the difficulty is, this is a huge, complex document that people aren't gonna read. So it's a matter, I think, of synthesizing the significant.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So maybe it's a 30-minute high-level presentation about the document and then just an open discussion on questions, concerns, clarifications.
I'd be curious to know what other students see, and I think that's more a better way.
People can easily digest.
Yeah,
With sticky notes on.
great. With pieces of the document is what she was saying, kind of like on posters. So 30 minutes kind of overview, then sort of maybe even the chapters, or just focusing on the main ones of like inventory, key findings, recommendations, kind of different areas where people can ask questions and talk more about those things.
Yeah, but I'm thinking, I think it's always, at least for me, helpful to hear what other people say.
Yeah.
Um,
How do you see that going?
I don't know, I have to think about it.
Okay.
I think it's
Because
something else to
usually
think about.
for us, when we do the kind of informational, then we try to just have, I think it would be great if you all were kind of at stations as well. And grab like people that have been working on this along with staff and having kind of those conversations in station areas. Like raising hands and answering is sort of a way to accomplish that. It just doesn't work that well.
Well, I'm just looking, when you had for the open house, there were 17 people,
Yeah, I know.
right? I mean,
It's hard.
It's really hard to get.
It's hard to get people to come.
I know.
It's hard to get people to show up to things.
Well, in phase one, we had probably 100 people. At least. Yeah, they
The
can.
special interest groups will comment on what they're interested in and that's it.
That wasn't my impression of the phase one community. meeting.
Well,
There were a lot
but
of
it was-
people who Just came from the community that wanted to know more about.
Right, but at this stage, and I was at that, beginning, that early community meeting. It was people who were curious about what's going on, what is this?
Would you mean that for this phase or for phase
For
one?
phase one, and we're at the point where we're wrapping it up to some degree, and I think at this point, anybody that has anything to say is gonna be people who are particularly interested in recreation, or particularly interested in trails, and they'll come and they'll say what they have to say,
Well,
as opposed to digging deep into the entire document.
we certainly do our best at, promotion
Yeah.
and trying to encourage, and I think, we can, record the 30-minute presentation and post that for people to watch. And then kind of have the pieces where people are providing input online. We can try to.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's possible. I don't want to do it, but I think it's possible to highlight the guiding principles.
Yeah.
The main points, the process, and the next phase. And that's what I think would be useful to people in the community who probably aren't paying that much attention to it now. I mean, I still know a lot of people who say, what's guiding golden? So
I don't want to just,
I'm sorry. I'm just trying to think about what is the best way to get as much attention as possible so there's community buy-in.
totally, I hear that.
And in a lot of projects, we're getting more feedback online than in person. And that's why we so we're doing 2 weeks of open comment online. A lot of projects historically would do 1 week. Well, that's not enough time for someone to get through a document this big. You think we'll get some online traction here in Golden, and so we allocated 2 weeks for that to be open. We want them in person too, but it's the reality of competing with how many things people have going on in the evening hours.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Helps.
Fair.
Free beer usually.
Yeah, that's true. The beer talks, there were what?
That's true.
Beer talks.
Yeah, do a beer talk.
Yeah.
And that's not free there either. You can still come.
Yes.
Hey, well, we are right at time. I think we successfully did it. I mean, we made it through most of the content. We got a lot of great feedback. Again, I really appreciate your time and attention and expertise. And we'll communicate through email on all of the next steps as we work through them.
And I just want to say how much I appreciate all of your hard work too. I know this was a lot of commitment but I think that it really reflects all the work that you put into it. And I'm just really thankful for all of your time. So thanks for spending that.
You're nothing if not passionate.
I like it.
I don't know why, but I just have this. I feel like I'm not here.